Good afternoon, everyone. It's 1 o'clock. Before getting started, I want to do a quick audio check to make sure everyone can hear me. If you're in the room right now and you can hear me, can you please type in the Carmen Zoom chat to let me know how it sounds? All right, I got one confirmation so far and more coming in. Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. And again, good afternoon and welcome to our next Workday Core Concept session. It is December 3rd, 2019, and today's topic will focus on the core concept of costing within Workday. Here are your presenters this afternoon. My name is William Ashley. I'm the Communications and Engagement Director for the Enterprise Project, and I'll be facilitating today's conversation with experts from our HR and payroll team, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves.
Thanks, William. My name's Christina Cardenas. I am the Payroll Accounting and Commitments Lead. We work primarily with payroll expenses as well as reports. I've been at Ohio State for 15 years, predominantly working in HR and finance areas.
Hi, my name is Andy Pope. I've been with Ohio State since 2016. I'm the Payroll Accounting Business Analyst. And yeah.
Cool. All right, thanks Christina and Andy. We look forward to hearing from you in a few minutes. I'll start with a few housekeeping items today. First, please note that this session has one-way audio only. That means you can hear us, but we can't hear you. But we still want to receive your questions, comments, and feedback throughout the session. To do so, please use the Carmen Zoom group chat feature on your screen. You might need to hover around and look for the little bubble, the bubble that looks like a thought bubble. That's how you activate the chat feature within Carmen Zoom. Feel free at any time throughout the session to insert some questions for our panelists, and we'll spend some time throughout the session answering your questions and responding to your feedback. I want to have you practice the use of that Carmen Zoom group chat feature first. We know that a lot of people across campus in the medical center will gather in groups in conference rooms or offices to watch together. In order for us to have an accurate count of how many people are listening today, if there is more than one person watching with you at your computer, can you please type in the number of people in the room into the Carmen Zoom chat feature? Again, if you're watching this in what we call a watch party or a group of people together, can you please use the chat feature to enter the number of people in your room? That'll give us an accurate count of how many people are tuning into this session today. Second, please note this session is being recorded and it will be made available both to you as participants and to those across the university who were unable to attend. And lastly, I want to stress that our intent today is to not give a training in Workday concept of costing. Instead, it's an introduction to this concept and we'll go over some basic information. In no way do we accept university employees to lead with a mastery of this information. Please know that detailed training will become available about 3 months before Workday Go Live to teach those in much greater detail for those who will be doing this kind of work. But today, we think it's important for the whole HR, payroll, and finance community to have an understanding of these concepts. And speaking of our Workday core concepts, this has been about a year-long journey across our HR, payroll, finance, and supply chain areas. There are unique concepts for different areas of the university and the medical center. So throughout the past year, each of these different groups have had a different trajectory or a different series of Workday core concept sessions. Everything from basic introductions to Workday to staffing models or financial information or how different areas will do business processes. All of these past recordings are available on the Enterprise Project website. So if you're a finance professional who wants to watch the HR core concepts, you're more than welcome to do so. Just log on to the Enterprise Project website. The link is on the bottom right of your screen. And you can access all of those recordings. But importantly, this concept of costing is cross-functional. It's important to both HR and finance professionals and others. So we're having one session so everyone can hear the same information at the same time. Here's a quick look at our agenda today. Christina's going to take over and go over the basic components of cost centers and how organization assignments are within Workday. We'll stop for some Q&A before hopping into our Workday environment for 2 demonstrations, a costing allocation and a payroll accounting adjustment. Then we'll end with plenty of time for more Q&A. With that, I'll turn it over to Christina to begin the session.
Thanks, William. In previous sessions, you may have heard some basic concepts around supervisory organizations, position requisitions, cost centers, and the idea of costing associated with all of them. Now, we'd like to layer in how the HR and finance communities will work to bring those concepts together in Workday. Specifically, we will look at some attributes of the supervisory organizations and positions that require special attention, as well as how to interact with them in the future. Then we'll discuss the future state of direct retro distribution, or DRDs, as well as the department budget table, or DBTs, along with some simple terminology changes. You should already be familiar with the concept of supervisory organizations, or SUP orgs. SUP orgs are meant to show the reporting line relationships between employees and their managers and are very useful when reporting on a management hierarchy, such as looking at who reports to whom. Every employee at Ohio State will belong to a supervisory organization in Workday, and it will largely be visible to you, something we don't have today. Each supervisory organization has a set of standard work tags associated with it. For a reporting of department hierarchies, the most relevant work tag on the supervisory organization is the cost center. A cost center is equivalent to a PeopleSoft department. What's important to understand is that each supervisory organization will have a default cost center associated with it. This cost center, or department ID, is then passed along to positions every time a new position is created within that supervisory organization. The cost center on the position signifies the owning department of the position while also keeping the managerial hierarchy and reporting accurate. This most easily equates to the department ID on the job management page in PeopleSoft. We will include a screenshot in the appendix for your review. Something to note is that the cost center or work tag combinations do not signify how a position is funded. We'll cover that more in depth when we review costing allocations. So to review, if you look at the Chevron process, when a supervisory organization is created, it is assigned a default cost center. When a manager then creates a new position or job requisition, that default is inherited or defaulted from the supervisory organization. The requisition is then routed to HR for review. We need HR to review the cost center on the requisition and approve, update, or send back as appropriate. Once HR approves the requisition, this will route to finance for review as well. Finance will need to review the cost center and the other work tags and will need to either approve or send back as appropriate. Now, the trick with this concept is, if a manager has employees that work in various departments, they'll need to pay special attention that the position is in fact assigned to the right cost center. An inaccurate cost center on a position has downstream impacts to HR, finance, and even the identity management team. To prevent any downstream issues, HR will need to use Workday to review the cost center on all requisitions which route to them for accuracy. We'll show an example of this in the upcoming slides. On the last slide, we covered how each supervisory organization has a set of work tags. Next, we'd like to explain how each position also has a set of work tags associated with it. Again, this is different from the way the position is funded, which we'll discuss when we cover costing allocations. In Workday, the cost center on the organization assignment, or the position itself, is the driver behind department or unit reporting lines. As I mentioned before, the cost center from supervisory org will automatically default as the cost center on the position's organization assignment. This may or may not be accurate for a given position. The good news is we have the ability to override this inheritance step and make the correction when creating a new position. Again, getting this cost center assignment correct on the position is imperative to HR and financial reporting. I know this has been a lot of conceptual information, so now let's take a look at an example and bring this concept to life over the next few slides. So, Gene Smith wants to create a job posting for a new assistant coach in basketball. The default cost center for Jean's supervisory org is CC 54321 football. Jean's supervisory organization default cost center is football because when we converted Jean into Workday, the majority of his employees worked in football. If at any given time we determine that we don't want football to default when Jean creates things, that can be done on the supervisory org. As a manager, what Jean needs to do is use Workday to override the cost center on the new assistant coach job requisition to properly reflect the organization assignment. Based on previous slides, because we are creating a new position under Jean's supervisory org, the cost center of CC 54321 football will automatically inherit. The system will default the new coach under the football cost center, and Jean should update to the basketball cost center in order to get the position to show up in the correct department. If not updated, the new assistant coach's work at OSU would not be correctly reflected for HR or identity management reports under basketball. HR and finance need to help catch and correct any discrepancies in Workday when applicable. Once the requisition is submitted, it will route to HR for review. HR will review the cost center for the organization assignment and should validate if it is accurate. If it is found to be inconsistent with what the position needs, HR will use Workday to update the request. Once reviewed by HR, the requisition is then routed to finance for review and approval. Finance cannot make changes directly, and if an error is caught, it would need to be sent back to HR or the hiring manager for correction. Something to note, typically the supervisory organization cost center defaults will be the same as the position organization cost centers and would not need to be changed. In cases of centers, executive leaders, or interdisciplinary areas, your managers may have to make updates as needed, as they may have one supervisory organization with positions that are owned across the enterprise. In preparation for Workday, we do recommend that for these types of areas, finance and HR collaborate to create a simple cheat sheet listing out cost center relationships for hiring managers, HR, and finance support teams so they can get it right from the get-go. As I mentioned previously, incorrectly assigning a cost center does have downstream impacts. In the example I described, if Jean had not updated the cost center for the new basketball coach from football to basketball, the FTE report for the basketball department would only show 2 FTEs, as illustrated in this first example. We know that's incorrect since Jean just created a position for a 3rd basketball coach. If all goes right, the basketball cost center would have been updated at the requisition stage, and when reports are run for the basketball department cost center, it would show the accurate 3 FTEs. Alternatively, if you wanted to see all the people or FTEs that report to Jean, you could run a report using the supervisory organization criteria to see that for Jean's supervisory org, he has 8 individuals reporting to him. If you get it wrong, don't worry. The organization can always be updated and will route for approval. Hopefully those examples help drive home the concept of cost centers and supervisory orgs and positions, as well as their impacts to our business. If you haven't quite gotten the hang of it, don't worry. This isn't training. We'll continue to develop job aids and training to assist you in the future. These concepts can take some time to get accustomed to. I know it took me a long time. Before we jump in, though, to our next Workday tenant, we'll take an even deeper look at what all of this means. I want to touch on 2 other costing concepts that you may have previously heard of. Costing allocations, which is the equivalent of the department budget table in PeopleSoft, are a proactive means of assigning funding to a position for payroll that is yet to be paid. Payroll accounting adjustments, which are equivalent to direct retro distributions or DRDs in PeopleSoft, are a reactive adjustment to funding. These are done when payroll has posted and needs to be updated from one funding source to another. Because of how Workday is configured, costing allocations will need to be set up by hiring managers when they initially create any new positions. Don't worry, the position requisition will always workflow to both HR and finance for review and approval. Additionally, When certain types of populations are hired, costing will also may also need to be initiated by hiring managers. Again, this type of activity always workflows to finance for approval. At any other time, the finance community or OSP or grant managers, where applicable, can make any costing allocation changes for employees. In general, hiring managers are only responsible for assigning costing allocations one time. You'll notice that this responsibility is also shifting away from HR. However, that doesn't mean HR folks aren't going to get questions. HR will still have access to view this data as well as historical data to help support in answering those questions. In a similar sense, and because of how Workday is configured, payroll accounting adjustments, or PAAs, which are our equivalent to direct retro distributions, will be done by the finance committee or grants managers where applicable. In Workday, we're able to separate security so that our finance teams and others responsible for reconciliation can take action in a more controlled way. The good news is that the individuals reconciling the general ledger can make changes as needed, which is something we don't have today. This eliminates rekeying in HR and separates the financial component from colliding with the HCM component. Let's take a pause at this time, as the next thing we'll do is go into a real demonstration of these processes. I'm going to hand it over to William to go over some questions you may have at this time.
Thanks, Christina. While we over here log into our Workday environment and get ready for the demonstration, we'll pause and see who in the audience has questions about the content that Christina has covered so far. If you have any questions, please, at this time, type those into the chat feature in Carmen, Zoom, and we will spend some time answering them. All right. Christina's been very thorough. No questions have come in yet. There's plenty of time throughout. No need to wait for the pauses in our session to type in questions. So at any time, please use the chat feature in Carmen Zoom to type in your questions for Christina and Andy. Until then, we'll get started with the next part of our presentation, which is when Christina will bring some of these concepts to life within our Workday environment. Christina?
Great. Okay, so let's get started. Welcome to the Workday homepage. I'm currently logged in as Caitlin Evans, a payroll costing initiator in Workday. Basically, Caitlin is a finance person out in the field. Alternatively, a payroll costing initiator can also, if appropriate, be assigned to someone in the grant space as well. And don't forget, managers can also view costing. Let me do a quick recap of some of our Workday 101 items that you may have attended in the past. Across the top of the home page, you'll find the home button, this block O. At any given time, when clicked, it will return you to the home page. Right adjacent to it, you'll see the search field, where you can search for workers, reports, or other HR or finance attributes as needed. You'll see the bell, which is Workday notifications storage. This will give you, when you run a report or a hire is complete, it tells you what's going on. And to the right of that, the inbox, which is basically a work list and has items that must be completed by you. Additionally, in this demo, we're going to be using the proxy feature in order to show you Workday functionality. As I'm sure you've heard, this feature will not exist in Workday when you log into the real system. Again, as a reminder, Caitlin is currently somebody with a finance role that has access to reconcile the general ledger. So our problem is, Caitlin was reconciling the general ledger and noticed that Carmen, Ohio was incorrectly funded for the month of November. She also knows that Carmen will have a new funding split for December forward because the basketball team received a grant. Caitlin will need to do two things. First, update Carmen's funding for December forward using the costing allocation functionality, or previously DBT. Two, she'll need to create a payroll accounting adjustment to correct the posted payroll for November. First, let's update Carmen's funding moving forward on the costing allocation. I'm going to type Carmen's name using the search feature and hit enter. And I'm going to select the employee record. Additionally, if you knew Carmen's employee ID number or name.number, that could have been typed in the search bar and would also return the same results. We're going to scroll down to pay and costing allocations. Workday is security-based. The more access you have, the more you can see within these modules. Caitlin has access to view costing because of her current security role. We're gonna expand right here so you can see costing on a larger screen. And we can see that effective 7/1/19, Carmen is funded from athletics football for 100%. Because we received a grant, Caitlin is moved for November forward, we're going to actually go in and make an update to split fund her. We're gonna collapse this back down and click on the maintain button. Costing initiators will have this button. Approvers or other people that cannot initiate requests would not. We'll click on this button and it'll take us to the assign costing allocation business process. What you'll see is that the worker and position pre-populated. Carmen, Ohio, the worker plus position is equivalent to the employee ID and record. Think employee ID, record. We're gonna hit go. Typically, worker costing is done for people on the university or anytime you want to put someone on a grant. Position restriction costing is primarily used by our grants teams, by our health system teams. And when a person leaves the position, the costing remains with them. When a person vacates worker costing, the costing disappears. For the purposes of this demo, where Carmen works in athletics and we're putting her on a grant, so we're gonna use worker plus position costing. Here we are on the second page. We're gonna scroll down just a little and we're gonna end her costing effective November 30th. And we're doing this because it's December 3rd. Payroll for November has completed. We're gonna go ahead and add an end date. An end date is required whenever you're adding a new costing row. Because I wanna split fund her across basketball and football, I wanna use her existing line as the basis for her next funding block. So I'm going to go ahead and click copy costing allocation. What you'll see is that the start date populated with December 3rd, 2019, which is today's date. That's just what it always does. We want to make sure that Carmen's coverage starts December 1st. So we're going to go ahead and update that start date to the 1st of December. We also know that it's indefinite. So we're going to go ahead and leave this end date blank. I'd like to also call your attention to the default organization assignments. This is what we were discussing in previous slides. You'll see that while Carmen had been funded from football, her position is actually owned by Athletics General. This default cost center is used, one, to report where her position is housed, not how it's paid for, as well as anytime we have expired funding, gaps in funding, missing funding, or a grant expires, this is what would be used to pay for her record, and it replaces the clearing account that we have today. We're gonna scroll down a little more, and I'm going to add another row. We're going to go ahead and we're doing, basketball is in athletics. Athletics is part of the university company, so we select the university company. Our cost center, you have two options. If you know your cost center number, you can type it here. Otherwise, you can just type basketball. Ooh, you have to spell it right though. Basketball. And it'll pull up the cost center for you. Notice how when I type that cost center, this fund balancing unit, and I'm gonna just expand this to make it a little easier to read, pardon me. Balancing unit and function defaulted. That means that these three work tags are related work tags to this cost center. We're gonna go ahead and add a grant value because we want to pay her from that new grant. And please pay special attention to the fund and function. You see the fund is currently FD 200 and the function is FN 126. When I click this, you'll see that the fund flips to FD 520, which is the equivalent of 590,000, and that the function leaves from auxiliaries and becomes basic research. Again, it's because these two work tags are related to this grant. Something else I want to bring up, I typically work my funding from left to right, putting my grant value as the last option, unless you're doing cost share, at which point you would add your fund. Great. So we're going to go ahead and collapse this back down. And we want to go over and make sure we split fund. So 50, 50. If you wanted to do more than one costing line, you could continue to add end dates and add rows. For the purposes of this demo though, we are only going to add a new block December forward. We're going to scroll down. This is our old costing now, all the way to the bottom. Another option to add if you didn't want to copy because you want to create a brand new split. You can put any comments that you need to put in, like please approve and submit. Great. So what you'll see is that your up next person is Holly Ross, which is a cost center manager. This is typically a finance person in your department that has approval authority over budget. I'm going to go ahead and expand these details and processes by clicking on this caret and scrolling down just a bit to show that you can see the start date of the new costing. It does not have an end date. Her new split, 50, 50. I'm going to scroll down a little more. And her old costing, 7/1/11 to 11/30/19. It also shows up here under existing. This is what it was. I typically just work in here though. So we're gonna go ahead and scroll up a little more, and I'd like to show you the process. This basically shows you the BP history. You can see that Caitlin completed her initiation step, that both the program accounting manager and the project accounting manager were bypassed, and that's because we didn't use any work tags that had those people in them, and that there are 2 approvals by cost center managers, and they both happen to be Holly Ross. That's because we use 2 different cost centers in our costing allocation, football and basketball, and it just so happens that Holly is the cost center manager over both. What's good is 1 approval by Holly satisfies the full BP requirement. BP is business process requirement. So we are going to proxy in.
Can we actually do a quick pause?
Of course.
There are 2 questions that came in before we go forward.
Sure.
So 2 questions so far have come in, and you can probably see them as well on the screen, Christina, but I'll read them out loud. So far, is this demonstrating that you can't search with EIDs? And can you still use EIDs for searches? Yeah, you sure can use them. I'm not using them because this is all stage data, so it would be a real employee, and I didn't want to use this real employee's employee ID number, but totally, if you know your employee ID number, you can type it in the search box, and it would populate that person's information. Great. And the next question, at this point, if you want to edit what you put in so far, how do you do that? As Caitlin. So I'm Caitlin, I realized I made a mistake and I need to do a change. Mm-hmm. You actually probably have to like take it back. There's these related actions that you would do to get into the business. It's a little convoluted to get out, but you know what? I can do some screenshots and we'll like add it to answer it just to not get too far off. Cool. So it's possible. And then those who are doing this would definitely cover that in training when it's available. Really good questions. All right, let's keep going. All right, great. So this position is actually being funded from the university, so it's going to a cost center manager. If we were working with the health system, this request would actually route to their resource review committee. So we're gonna go ahead and go to our next step, which is our approval step as Holly Ross. And if you were funding a position across the university and the health system, it would go both to a cost center manager and to the resource review committee. So if you have 6 cost centers on a person's costing, you're gonna have potentially up to 6 approvals in the request, but nobody really does that, just letting you know. Okay, so we're logged in as the cost center manager, again, somebody that has like approval authority over the budget. There are 2 ways to see the requests that came in. This is one, and again, she's got 2 notifications because she's the cost center manager over 2, but when she does the approval, these consolidate.
And then 2, this inbox. I prefer the inbox because I like to see everything in one place. And you can navigate to the request. This first one will do. And I'm just going to make this a little bigger so we can see the whole thing. I'm going to scroll down just a little, and we can see that the status is in progress. You can scroll down a little more, and she sees the same thing that Caitlin saw after she submitted, that effective December 1st with no end date. We have 2 lines of costing, football, basketball on a grant that's split 50-50. If she scrolled a little further down, you can see that her historical costing 100% ends November 30th. I'm gonna scroll a little more. You could read comments and enter your own. Here's Caitlin, please approve. And Holly, as the cost center manager, has a couple of options. She can approve the request, which means it's good to go. She can send it back and choose to either send it back to the person who initiated it. She can add approvers as necessary if there's someone that needs to see this. For example, a senior fiscal officer, you might need a senior fiscal officer approval on this request. You can do so. If you click on these related actions, she can also deny. If she denies the request, it stops the whole thing. She can save the request for later. So if Holly was going to write some really complex instructions before she sends something back, she could start writing it and save it for later so that her comments are saved. Or she could cancel. If she cancels, this is not going to cancel the request. It'll just take you back to your inbox. It's a little tricky, so we wanted to call that out. For the purpose of this demo, we're going to approve this request. And this green check proves that you've successfully completed the costing allocation. Because this costing allocation used a grant, the principal investigator will also be notified via an inbox notification. We're gonna go ahead and look at our details and processes, and we're gonna go back as Caitlin, just to show you what she can see. We're going to use the search box again to look for Carmen. Again, this is where you could have typed in Carmen's employee ID number and it would have pulled her up, but she is probably a real person behind the scenes, so we're not going to use her real employee number. We're going to go to Job, Worker History, and you can see that I just successfully completed a costing allocation for Carmen. What's great about this is that you have visibility across the enterprise. Today, when you enter an HRA in athletics, somebody in engineering can't see what you're doing. In the future, if you enter a request to update costing in athletics and Workday, and somebody in engineering also needs to make a change, they could go into Carmen's Job Worker History and see that there may be an in-progress costing allocation for Carmen. It just provides greater visibility across the enterprise. Okay, another thing to note, once this BP completes, the next time we run encumbrances, the new update will be applied to the general ledger. The university line in Carmen's case will encumber through the end of the fiscal year, while the grant line is going to encumber through the life of the grant because we left this end date blank. Great. If mid-process, the request gets canceled or denied, all approvers or initiators get notified that this happened. Perfect. Okay, next, we still need to fix Carmen's November funding. She was fully funded from football and we want to show her as 50% funded from basketball. What we'll do is navigate back up to the search bar and type create payroll accounting adjustments. You don't have to type it all out. You probably don't even have to type all these words. It's just what I'm used to. We're going to click on this blue link and we're going to start filling this out. Again, the difference with payroll accounting adjustments, the only individuals that can submit this are accountants and in some cases, where appropriate, grant managers. A direct manager or principal investigator cannot take action like this. And that's just because it's increased complexity and we want to make sure that when we're making GL updates, It's really people that are the experts in that area. We're gonna go ahead and type her name. Again, here you could put her number, you could put her dot number and her employee number or her dot number, and it would return. And you see we get this little error message. We're getting this error message because there is a current in-flight payroll accounting adjustment, or DRD, for just as a reminder, for the month of July. We're gonna do a payroll accounting adjustment for the month of November, so we're okay to keep moving on. If we were trying to do this, we'd need, for July, we'd actually have to go back to that worker history page and figure out where this is currently sitting and reach out to that department to either cancel or get this moved forward so we can make that happen. Okay. So her pay group is going to be exempt. In the future, we have 3 pay groups. We have exempt for our monthlies, non-exempt for our biweeklies, and a fellowship pay group for all of our fellows. The company here is always the Ohio State University. Even if you're working in the health system or the health plan, the company that it's asking for here is your payroll company, and everyone is paid out of the Ohio State University. Your change reason will always be administrative error. This is just a required workday field. You will still have to answer questions for the Office of Sponsored Programs if you are moving expenses off a grant or onto a grant. Those are still required, and this does not take the place of that. We're going to scroll down a little more to these optional parameters. There's a couple of ways you can do payroll accounting adjustments. This is just what I find to be the easiest way, so I'm going to show you this way. We are going to go ahead and click on all periods, and we want to make an adjustment for November, so I'm going to click on that. I'm going to go ahead and leave this as on cycle because it's I knew it was an on cycle check. If you didn't know, you would probably want to select on cycle and off cycle. I'm going to add 2 rows because I'm 50-50 splitting Carmen. And I personally like to work down, but again, you could work however is appropriate for you. So I'm going to click that. And again, just to make it easier for everyone, I'm going to make that bigger. I'm going to come back here. I'm going to click her position. Pay component is like an earning code. Salary pay is equivalent to reg. If this person had vacation, you'd have that listed as well. You can see how there's also deductions, but this person does not have security to do any PAA deduction corrections. Most people don't actually. Salary pay. The costing company for both of these is the Ohio State University because athletics is under the Ohio State University. And what you see here is that the default work tags from that organization assignment that I showed you is what populates. Just for ease of use, I'm going to go ahead and remove these. But in reality, you probably would just override them. I'm going to go ahead and make the updates. The first row, putting her on her football costing, and see when I type this cost center, the fund, function, and balancing unit populate. Again, that's because they're related work tags to that cost center. Down here, I'm going to put the basketball cost center. Again, we have all of these related work tags that populate. Our fund of FD 200 and our balancing unit of athletics general. I'm going to add the grant value, and you will see that both the fund and balancing unit will replace. There you go. Fund goes to FD 520. Ooh, sorry, not balancing unit, function. Sorry, not balancing unit, function, apologies. Update. Okay, we're gonna go 50% there and collapse that back down. We're gonna scroll and click OK. On this page, you'll see that for the period of 11/1 to 11/30 for Carmen, for this position or record, as we've just described it, for her salary pay, scroll down a little, she was originally paid fully from football, which is the from, current journal lines is from. Her proposed, or her to, is going to be split funded 2 ways. Again, I'm going to scroll this down a little more, and I'm going to expand this out. 50-50 for that same position for salary pay, basketball men's with your grant, football. You can see that this budget date populates, and that's the pay period end date typically and shouldn't be adjusted. One other thing to note, if I can scroll back up real quick, you'll see that Workday also calculates hours for all of our actual time. When a payroll accounting adjustment is done, those hours are also calculated. So it'll properly split 168 divided by 2 for each one of these lines, which is really helpful for our health system folks. If you wanted to add additional rows, you could by doing, you maybe did the first one on the first page and you decided, oh, I also want to move October. You can go ahead and add it here and do the same process of entering all the work tags. Your total debit amount, obviously from your from line, must match your proposed line. And it won't let you if it does not. We're gonna go ahead and click submit. And because this request has a grant value and this is less than 90 days, we're going to have to complete the OSP questionnaire. So we're gonna go ahead and click this questionnaire. And oh, it's asking, why was this expense really originally charged to the costing work tax from which it is now being transferred? New grant value was received after payroll deadline. Why should this charge be transferred to the proposed receiving OSP grant? You would say to properly recognize expenses. If I could spell, we're gonna just move on though. Okay, and we're gonna scroll down and hit submit. Next up is Holly Ross, the cost center manager or finance person that has budget approval authority. Again, we can click on this caret. We can scroll down a little. We can see that we're doing an adjustment for November 1st through November 30th. For Carmen, moving off 6230 from football. Going to men's basketball and football, 50-50 split. I'm going to also go up and show you the process. This is a little tricky because we're actually in the questionnaire. You only see that Caitlin completed the questionnaire. You could actually go back to the main process and see where it's sitting. But for the purposes of the demo, to keep it going, we're going to go ahead and log in as Holly. Click OK. Holly will also get 2 notifications, again, because we use 2 cost centers. She only has to approve once, though, that she's the manager over. I like the inbox. I'm going to make this bigger. What Holly as the approver gets is that we're doing an adjustment for November 1st for Carmen. You can see the current journal lines or the from is taking her off of football at 100%, and that her proposed or her to is split funding her 50-50 between basketball and football. And then here you can actually see those hours split across the 2 chart field strings, or excuse me, work tag strings. Old habits die hard. You can enter any comments if needed, and the cost center manager can actually see the answers to those 2 OSP questions. So if these were incorrectly done or aren't going to pass the test, this can be sent back. We're going to scroll down a little more, and here are your options. Similar to what she had in costing, she can approve, send back, add approvers. Maybe she wants the SFO to take a look at this because she's unhappy with this principal investigator, and they can do that. She can deny a request. Again, she could save it for later if she had written comments, and cancel just takes you back out. For the purposes of the demo, we're going to go ahead and approve it. And you'll see that up next is Brian Vogt. That's because he is our principal investigator, and we used a grant in the payroll accounting adjustment, or DRD. We're going to proxy in as Brian, not something you can do in real life. And we're going to click OK. Again, Brian gets notified that he has an action item, that he's got to do this. payroll accounting adjustment for Carmen, but I like to use my inbox. Here's my payroll accounting adjustment approval. I'm gonna expand this, scroll down, show that in November for Carmen, we are removing 6234 off of athletics, and that we are moving 50%. What he really cares about is that we're moving 50% onto his grant. Similar to what Holly has, he can view the answers to the questionnaire, which he actually probably provided, as well as the option to approve, send it back if he's unhappy with it, add approvers, which he probably wouldn't do, deny, save for later. For the purposes of the demo, we're gonna go ahead and approve it. And you'll see that this is successfully completed. So some things to note, because this actually will replace the DRD certification that PIs currently have to do. It's just gonna be in the system now. However, if a principal investigator takes a very long time to approve it, this will sit out there and not hit the grant until this approval is done. We know that our finance teams are going to want to keep this stuff moving forward. So we have created reports that will help you run an audit and see if you've got things that are still in the workflow that need to get approved. We're going to proxy in as Caitlin. And this is just how I'm choosing to do it. We're going to find Carmen again. We're going to go to her job, worker history, and you can see that I did a payroll accounting adjustment for Carmen right here. And then it's been successfully completed. Much like costing allocation, if you're trying to do something and someone else has something in progress, you can see it. If you remember, Carmen had an in progress payroll accounting adjustment for July. I'm sure if I see all these actions, we've been playing around with Carmen's record. If I scroll down far enough, you've got an in progress payroll accounting adjustment for July. And if you needed to see where it was, you can see that Holly Ross is currently got that in her work list. So you could actually reach out to her to help get that taken care of if you need to move this along. Great. As you take into the information we shared today, much of it new and different, but hopefully exciting, our hope is that you can leave the session having an introductory understanding of how costing transactions will be organized in Workday and what businesses are responsible for them. Please be sure to attend more formal training that will be provided closer to Workday Go Live on the content shared today. With that, I'm going to hand it back over to William to do another round of Q&A.
Thanks, Christina. We had plenty of questions come in during that demonstration. So I'm going to try to start from the top and we'll work our way down. If we do run out of time, we will absolutely take note of all of these questions and publish answers to them on the Enterprise Project website. So first, I believe this is back when you were entering fields as part of the payroll accounting adjustment process. Will pay periods default by position?
Pay periods will default by position. So if you're monthly, you'll only see monthly pay periods. If you're biweekly, you would only see biweekly pay periods.
Very good. So next, I think this one came up a little bit later as well. And since I'm not in this area, I might not get some of the pronunciations correct, but we're focusing on the question for those who are following along about the fact that e-pets or EPETs they'll be allowed once Workday goes live if that period was under PeopleSoft.
That's a really good question. Okay, so EPETs typically that we do are the greater than 90-day PETs, but my answer actually applies to all activity that happened in PeopleSoft that you need to make corrections to. So we're still talking about what those deadlines are, but from a grants perspective, I know there'll be some communications coming out to say, hey, this is your deadline to get any grants corrections into the system. I've heard a couple of different dates from the Office of Sponsored Programs, but I know that'll be coming out soon, and we'll take note of that to try to make sure we get that published as early as possible. Yes, but anytime post go live, what happens is it's really complicated, and we are probably going to have very restricted ability to make changes post for any payroll that posted in PeopleSoft. So that's a really good question to ask.
Can you just read? Oh,
yeah, I'll read this one. So also, pay period we are currently in for on cycle, or the on cycle for which on cycle just mean which pay period. Back when I was doing the payroll accounting adjustment, there was something that said pay period on cycle. When we'll train you, we'll actually probably train you to always pick on cycle and off cycle, because you don't know when that person's check was issued. Basically, on cycle just means the paycheck was issued during an on cycle payroll, and off cycle means it was just issued not with the big batch that we did. An off cycle would be like somebody didn't get paid and we need to get a check to them really quickly, so we're going to do an off cycle check. From a training perspective, I'd probably have you guys trained to always select both. On the proposed adjustments, will it show an end date if I included the DRD? Will you be able to distribute dollars versus percentages? So I'm not sure that I fully understand. Oh, do you mean, maybe you mean, do you get to see the grant end date? I might, Sarah, ask you to elaborate on that first question a little more. But for your second question, will you be able to distribute by dollars versus percentages? On the second page, so on that first page, I put that 50-50 split. You don't have to do that. You could just go to the second page and use dollar splits if that's what you prefer. Sometimes it's just easier to do it on the first page, but you can do either. Can you do multiple pay periods at once? Yes, you can do PAAs or direct retro distributions for multiple pay periods at once. You do, if you enter everything on that first page, it'll apply that logic to every single pay period. If you choose not to use that funding on the first page, you'd have to rekey that funding, you know, for every pay period that you were trying to do. And we'll talk more about that in training. Can Caitlin rescind this request after it has been submitted? No, Caitlin cannot rescind the request for a payroll accounting adjustment. Honestly, for a payroll accounting adjustment, I would probably never rescind the request, and I would ask that the person goes back in and does another request to undo what they just did. It's kind of like a journal activity. On the payroll costing side, if there was an error or a mistake made where you need to rescind, again, we really probably wouldn't rescind. We would just ask you to go ahead and do another one to fix it. The reason you might have seen rescind in the history is because Andy and I are admins and we were playing around with undoing the activity that we had done the day before. The inbox equals work list. It does equal the work list. That is exactly the same thing in my opinion. Is OSP EPET process going away with the PAA process? Yes. So I'm thinking EPETs is greater than 90 days. That does go away. You can do everything in Workday, which is pretty cool. They also have, in addition to the DRD certification that PIs had to do for grants that are less than 90 days, which is they also don't have to do the EPET certification because everything is done in Workday moving forward. So are PIs reviewing and approving all retroactive transactions as well as costing? They do review all retroactive payroll accounting adjustments. And they do it today. It's just that today they do it through the OSP tools, and in the future they'll do them in Workday. They will not be approving costing allocations. They just get a notification. And we chose to do that just because we didn't want to bog down our approval processes. And today they typically are working with their finance teams or grant managers to let them know what needs to happen. So we assume that the people entering those requests have the appropriate authority to do that. So on the proposed adjustments, will it show an end date if included in the DRD? Date of the month. One second, let me read this. The end date on the proposed adjustments defaulted to 11/30. So maybe that's the question, why was it 11/30? That was the budget date that defaulted. The budget date in Workday on the accounting line is similar to the pay period end date. And typically we would ask you not to touch that date, but we'll talk more about that in training. And Sarah, if you have any additional questions, I'd be interested in just chatting with you to make sure I'm answering your need, and I can always elaborate on it more in the Q&A that we publish for other people. Great. Oh, is there one more question? Okay, great.
Cool. Yeah. All right. So if you want to transition, I think, back to some of our PowerPoint slides. Thanks everyone for all those fantastic questions that came in. It really shows how engaged the group is and interested in this topic. As I mentioned before, we are recording this session. So if you want to watch it again, take a look at the different actions that Christina was taking and navigating through those different processes. This will be available very soon on the Enterprise Project website. You can just search for Workday Core Concepts, go to our communication toolkit or our media page to see all of these different recordings of our core concepts. I want to thank everyone for spending an hour with us this afternoon to learn more about this core concept of costing. If you haven't yet subscribed to our newsletter, we have a monthly Enterprise Project Digest where we share things like notifications of these sessions, different engagement opportunities across campus, and just general information. Please do subscribe to our newsletter. It's on our website listed there. If you have more questions about the content shared today or anything else about Workday, shoot us an email at enterprise-project@osu.edu. That inbox is monitored daily, and we do get back to you as soon as possible. With that, I want to thank everyone again for your time and thank Christina and Andy for guiding us through today. We're going to end here and see everyone later. Thank you and have a great afternoon.